This is the second part to the rubber duck animation video. So just as an overview, I'll just look at what it is that we're wanting to accomplish here. So if you recall, this is what the finished video should look like. And basically the goal of this video is, or this assignment is to learn how to take a soundtrack, some sort of music, and link it to your animation. Because as if you've ever watched an animation show, you know that music is a powerful tool to create a mood and to really improve the overall quality of the animation. So the more that we can sync our animation to the soundtrack, the better. And this assignment is geared to teach us how to do that. So once again, this is what this should look like when it's completed. Notice that the duck is moving up and down with the water, and then with the bump bump, it rocks. And with each of the squeaks, it is the shape keys transform it so it looks like it's being squished. So the idea once again is that this animation should link perfectly with the soundtrack. So looking at this again, recall that we have a resource here which guides you sort of through how to create this whole assignment. We last day in the other video learned how to model this right up to step 9. So we had created the rubber duck, and now we're going to be starting into step 10. And so what I will do is I will switch my screen over to Blender, and then I'm going to walk you through the rest of these steps. So in here, what you should see is you should see our actual rubber duck that we've created. This is sort of where we ended up last time in the last video. And if you recall, we created 2 scenes, one called bath pieces, the other one rubber duck. So the rubber duck obviously contains both the main scene plus the added rubber duck. One of the things we're going to now do in step 10 is we're going to create a whole new full copy, and we're going to call this animation. And before we get started really on this, what we're going to need to do in order to add sound is we really want to change our screen. Now, we haven't really looked at this much before, but this is the default setup for a screen, but we have many other options. So depending on what we want to do, we can choose any of these options, but for right now, we're going to choose video editing. So video editing will give us a screen that looks like this. And one of the things that we want to do right off the bat is we need to change our scene, which reverted back to bath pieces. We need to change it back to animation. And then we need to make sure that we are in the 3D view window, and we need to, in front view, just zoom out and maybe scroll a little bit so that we can see our scene a little better, but we want to basically be able to see our duck, okay? And we can be in orthographic view, but basically we have this now set up the way we want. Now what we need to do down here is, this is a new screen here. This is basically a tool up here called Video Sequence Editor. And if we're in Video Sequence Editor and we click on Add, we have an option to add a sound clip. And so in here, I'm going to go to where I saved all those files that we did. And one of them is called the Rubber Duck Song. And so that's an MP3 file. Now what I want to do is I want to actually scroll wheel and scroll out. So I'm scroll wheeling down quite a ways so that we can drag and crop this. I'm going to show you what I mean. Because if I were to turn on the music here, what I'm listening to is a long song with an introduction of Bert and Ernie talking about himself in the tubby. But I don't want that. What I want is I want to get to where the music starts, and the music starts, and in your instructions it says I need to crop to frame 750. Well, in fact, I think it probably wants to be cropped closer to 700. So I'm going to zoom out a bit, and then what I need to do is you'll see that there's a little arrow here at the far left of this sound strip. I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to then I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to drag just try that again. I'm going to right click on here and drag this over with holding down the right mouse button all the way over to 700. Now I didn't go zoom out enough, so I'm going to have to shift scroll wheel to scroll my screen a bit so I can get this over to 700. So what I'm looking at is you can see the counter at the bottom there. I'm trying to make that base 700 or very close to 700. When I get to 700, what I need to do is no longer right click on this arrow, but I'm going to right click over to the right a little bit where that says rubber ducky, press the letter G on the keyboard, and then I'm going to just pull this back over, and I'm going to pull it, and I'm going to shift scroll wheel over, and then G and grab again and bring it all the way back to frame 1. So now if I were to play this at frame 1, listen what happens. We now have the song that we're listening to. So if you hear this song again, we have a couple of key things in here. One is a bump bump, and the other one is a squeak squeak. So if you listen here, bump bump. So I at around 60, and I'm just going to double check that. Around 60, I hear a bump bump. Maybe even around 55. I'm going to try it one more at 55. Yeah, so it looks like right around frame 55 is where the bump bump is happening. And maybe I'm even going to try 50. Let's just see if 50 is. Yeah, it's pretty close. So I'm going to start it at frame 50. And now what I want to do is I want to animate with the bump bump that the duck rock back and forth. So the way I do that, it's not too complicated. If I select this duck, and if I have the duck here in 3D view window, and I click on where the duck is located only, I don't have to see the rest of this. And now what I can do is I can make sure that in orthographic view that I'm going to rotate this. So what I want to do is I want to lock rot scale this into place at frame 50. And then at about frame 58 or so, I'm going to rotate this 30 degrees so that it rocks. And it says in your book 30 degrees. I'm actually going to rotate it 45 degrees to make it even more obvious. And I'm going to lock rot scale that at frame 58. And then around frame 65, I'm going to R minus 45 to bring it back to normal and lock rot scale that. So what this has done is, if we listen to the soundtrack now in relation to my duck here, we'll see this. So you can see that the duck is moving, and if I were to bring the whole scene in, you can see the duck moves in the water in relation to that. So we have the first sort of synced movement here. The next thing we need to do, though, is that we need to sync the squeak. So if I listen again to where the squeak occurs, squeak, squeak. So we can listen to it around maybe 120. About 120 is the squeak. So right around 120, I need to deform my duck now. So I'm going to click over here again. So I'm just looking at the duck. And now what I need to do is I need to change my screen here. So what I need to do is I need to go and change my screen to the properties screen here. So I see all these options. And now while I have my duck selected, I need to go to this tool, the object data tool. And then in here, there is something called a shape key. So a shape key is another way of animating, and it allows us to actually distort or deform an object using shape keys. And this is oftentimes useful for doing emotions, showing emotions and so forth. But in this particular case, we can use it to deform this duck. So if I click the plus button, that is not the shape key. I need to click it again a second time. Then this is the shape key. And I can give it a name, something like squeeze, for lack of a better name. And now what I will see down here is I'm going to see a value button, and that's the key here. But what happens is that the shape key is now essentially recording when I go into edit mode, and it's going to record any changes I make to this mesh object from where it was originally shaped to where I change it to. So what you'll see is if I go now into edit mode and I were to click on a point over here, and then I were to turn on my proportional editor, and I were to press the letter G, and I were to sort of drag and sort of just like basically morph this face in. And if I wanted to, I could do the similar thing here with a point down here if I wanted. I could just get away with the face though too, but this works. And so I could do the whole face and the body as if it was getting squished and squeaked in there. So now when I've done this, it looks like a complete mess here, but if I go back into object mode, notice I have my full complete duck there still. But if I change this value now, notice that it will distort it based on what I did. So it's going to make it look like I just squished this duck. Now, how do I animate that? I have the shape key, but I have to animate this. So I need to go up here and I need to change from my properties view window now, and I need to go to the dope sheet. So I'm looking for the dope sheet, which is right here. And in here, you may be familiar with the dope sheet from before when we were talking about this, but there is a little option here that says shape key editor. So in here, the shape key editor, I will now see my squeeze shape key. So what I want is at frame 120, that's sort of where the squeak started. I am going to lock this into place. And the way I do that is I just press 0 and press enter. And that will lock that in. And now if I move up, let's say to about 128, and I'm going to make this a 1. So I'm locking that into place at the full sort of morphing. And then I'm going to go back at frame 135 to normal. So what this looks like then, and I'll run it right from the bump bump. So we're going to run this and we hear the bump bump. And then when we hear the squeak, you see the morphing. Now you will hear a secondary squeak after that. I'm not going to bother putting that second squeak in here right now, but you should, for your assignment, do that. So we have got two things done, the bump bump where we rocked it, and then the squeak where we shape keyed it. Now, what I need to do here is I need to now try and animate the water in this scene. So I'm going to shift click on all of this so I can see all of this again. And reminder that actually I'm going to just click on this one right now. I want to animate my water plane. So I'm going to select my water plane here, and I'm going to go and I'm going to change from dope sheet here. I'm going to change back to properties. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a modifier, and I'm going to click on wave. Now the wave modifier, and if you're following along in your steps here, the steps for animating the water is step 15. It tells you to take off the x-axis. So you can see that there's a motion in the x-axis, and I'll just show you what it looks like right now just so you can sort of see. This looks like this. The water is just going like this. But if I take the x-axis off, you can see that it just moves along the y-axis. Now what we also see is that it's moving quite a lot. And so we may want to lower the speed to about 0.1, so it's more of a gradual movement. And we may even want to lower the height of this to about 0.3. So now if we take a look at what this looks like, you can see that it's rocking a little bit, but it's not rocking too much. Now the other issue I do have a little bit is the water is starting to poke a little bit out of the front. So I'm just sliding that back a little bit. So now what I see here is I see the water is sort of moving gently in my bathtub. So that's all good, it looks good. And if I were to add all this in together, what I'm gonna see is I'm gonna see it rock, I'm gonna see it squeak. But what I also need to see now is I need to see the duck actually bob up and down in relation to the water. So this is a bit of work, but we're gonna need to start right back at frame 1. And what I need to do here is I need to look at where this duck is in relation to the water. So starting with frame 1, I may want to bring it down a little bit so that it's right into the water itself. So you can sort of see where you're at. So it's starting to enter into the water, so it's just floating a little bit on there. And I could lock rot scale that into place. Now if I go, let's say up 20 frames, it looks like the water is raised a little bit. So what I want to do is just raise this up a little bit, and then I can lock rot scale this again. And I could go to, let's say, frame 40, and then it looks like it's gone up a bit again. So I could lock rot scale this, and then I could go to frame 60, and it looks like it should go down a little bit as well. So I'm going to bring it down a bit, and I'm going to lock rot scale that. I'm going to go to frame 80, and I'm going to bring this up again, or sorry, down a bit again, and I'll lock rot scale that. And then frame 100, I will start to bring this up a little bit. So you're just basically trying to have this the actual duck moving around a little bit with the motion of the water, so that you should see it to sort of bob along with the movement of the water. So what we'll see here is that, and I'm just about there. I'm just going to go to about 200 for sake of time, but we will, I'll move that up a bit. So we just want the duck just sort of just inside the water. So what we're going to see then, if I were to run this from frame 1, is you can see it sort of moving up and down with the water. Okay, does that make sense? And that's basically all you need to do. So once you finish this, you can just simply save your file, and then I can view what you have finished there. Now, ultimately, what we would do is we could render this whole thing as well, and then have this appearance of this movement. And just so you're aware, it doesn't automatically link the music to it when you render. You're going to have to use possibly an alternate program like Windows Movie Maker to add the music to it in sync with it. But this is the starting point for how to understand how to link a soundtrack to your animation. So hopefully that makes sense. And I will post this on there so that you can follow these directions to finish up this assignment. Thanks for watching.